For someone, but I do appreciate it so much, and I'm so honored to be with you today. It is a really small world, and you just never know who you're going to see when you turn the corner. I come in and look around the room and loved watching all of you get your lunch and visit with each other, and this gentleman walks up and says hello, and I said, I know that man. This is the person who loaned our agency in Knoxville the money that we needed to get out of the bond debt that we were in. Mr. Wilson and his bank, Citizens National, stepped forward when no other organization would even really talk to us. Not only did they do that, they made the loan at a very competitive rate, in spite of the fact that we were a pretty significant credit risk at the time, because they had faith in our management and in what we were doing. So it's good to see you, and I appreciate that.
You're more than welcome. It was an act of joy. That faith was entirely justified.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So you just never know where these connections are going to come. I looked at his face. I said, I know him. I should know who he is. And heard his name and said, immediately made that connection. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. And we were out this morning talking to our staff. You know, it's really hard to get out and do these trips. It takes up about 2 full days, and there's just any number of meetings and pressures and emails and phone calls back at the office. But this is probably the most important thing I'm going to do this week, and certainly the most important thing I do most of the time is to visit with people and hear about what's on your mind. So I'm going to talk to you for just a few minutes, but the most important part of this for me will be the conversation that I hope we can have after I'm finished in just a few minutes. I want to tell you about the Department of Children's Services. I know many of you know us, but some of you won't. And I want to tell you about our mission statement. I just was out with our staff and asked who can tell me our mission statement. We try to make it so that people can remember it. We say that it has 5 elements, and it begins and ends with community. So this is how I try to help our staff remember what our mission statement is. The first 2 words in our mission statement is fostering partnerships, and we're going to come back to that concept in just a few minutes. To do job 1, which is protect children, develop youth, and where do those children and youth need to live? In families, so to strengthen families, and then to come back to build safe communities. That's our mission statement, and that's what we try to do every day. Now, that might sound like a very sweeping mission statement. Of course, we don't really try to do that in a sweeping way. We really have a very targeted number of children and families that we are working with at any given time. And that number, out of 1.4 million children that we have in this state, by the way, almost a quarter of which live in poverty. That's a very serious statistic, because poverty, those of you in education and medicine know very well, carries with it a number of formidable challenges for children and families to overcome. So we're not working with 1.4 million. We're not even working with the 24% in poverty. We're working with about 26,000 at any given time. So that's a very small portion of that 1.4 million. And those are the children that we are working with that are in the most imminent danger. They're either in danger because of what a caretaker may be doing to them or not doing for them, or they may be in danger of committing their lives to a life of crime. So if you think about it in that way, that mission statement fits very beautifully with that 26,000. I'll break that number out for you a little further. About 8,200 of those children are in our actual custody, which means that the state is their parent. And that's a problem for lots of reasons. But that's about 8,200. About 1,200 of those are kids who are committed because of their delinquency. So about 7,000 of those would be what we call dependent neglect, the kids that you think of. Another 15,500 are with their families or kin, and we are providing services to try to prevent them from coming into state custody. And then about another 3,000 are on probation or aftercare or some kind of community service related to juvenile justice. So it's a very, very large number of kids, the custody and the non-custody and the juvenile justice kids. And then we have about 4,300 staff across the state who work with those families in various ways. Almost 600 of them work in our youth development centers. About 2,500 of them are frontline caseworkers, and then all the people it goes into supporting all of that work. We respond in our child abuse hotline in Nashville to about 170,000 calls every year. That's about over 460 calls every day. We toured the governor through that center. There had been several hundred calls on that shift before we ever got there that day. We have a special dedicated line for educators. We have a special dedicated line for medical professionals. It's a very complex operation. And as you can imagine, we're all reluctant to get involved in other people's business, especially so when it comes to families, right? If you know a husband and wife are having problems, you don't really want to get too close to that. If you know they're having trouble in their family some way, unless you're invited in, you typically are going to try to step back. But it is our job to reach in and get involved when a child, remember that 26,000, is in some kind of imminent danger. So that is our mission. That is what we do. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the successes that we're having, because you're reading a lot about our challenges, and I'm sure we'll have some questions about that. But let me just tell you that we have been busy the last 2 years, and we have done some very good things. Tennessee is actually #1 in the country for something really good. If you're a foster child anywhere in the country and you're going to get adopted, you hope you live in Tennessee, because it's going to happen faster here than anywhere else. And going from that limbo of foster care to a permanent family where you know this is who you belong to and you belong for the rest of your life, that's a really big deal. And so we're #1 in the country for how long it takes to get a child adopted. That's a really hard outcome to get and a hard one to be #1 at. And we've had it for several years. The other thing we're #1 at, if a child has been in care for more than 2 years, which means it's a complicated situation or the child has a lot of needs, we're also #1 in time to getting that child into a permanent home, whether it's their family or an adoptive family. So 2 really hard outcomes. Tennessee is #1, and it reflects the fact that we've put a lot of emphasis over the last 10, 12 years into our work on permanency. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. 809 children were adopted through the Department of Children's Services in fiscal year 2012, which just ended in June of last year. That's up from 761 the year before. So that's a big increase, but more than that, it's 40 more children who have a place that they know they belong than happened last year. We also passed the extension of foster care legislation last year, which I was really pleased to come in and support as commissioner. This allows youth. We try really, really hard to get kids into permanent families. We wouldn't be #1 in the country in these things, but we're working really hard at this. Sometimes with older youth, it's very difficult to get that done. They may come into care late in their childhood, 16, 16 and a half, 17. And there's been a kind of a traditional myth that you can't get those kids adopted or that they don't want homes. They certainly know much more about their birth families, and they certainly have much more mixed feelings about adoption than the younger kids do. So those kids were aging out at 18, and a lot of them were mad at us, and they would just tell us, "We've had enough, thank you very much." They'd go out on their own. 1 in 4 of them would be homeless within a year. I've seen many of those young people die on the streets, myself in my own career, in that career at Covenant House and the work that we did with the runaway shelter in Knoxville. So I came in and said, they should not have to pay when we fail. So we extended foster care to 21, which means that they can sign up for those additional 3 years of supervision and financial assistance. We have more than 200 of them, 280 of them are in secondary or post-secondary education across the state because they are taking advantage of that service. So this is we don't really, our first goal is still to get them adopted before they're 18. But if we fail, now they don't have to pay. They can stay in foster care till 21. I don't know how many of you have children. I happen to be the proud mother of 3 grown children. Would you like to guess how many of them I ever got out on their own by the time they were 18?
Just like the rest of
that
us,
would be a big
none.
fat zero. I just got the last one out this month at age 21.
We had 4.
So I have lived this reality.
They do come back.
I know. I'm really happy to come back. We got that one. But I have them spread out. So the oldest one went out, came back, and is already back out. So I had to move away from Knoxville to get her out. So I had to get up and leave and go to Nashville to take this job. So it's just the fact of life these days. The average time to leave home, the average age to leave home for the last time in this country is now 27 years old. The economy, the fact that it takes longer to get through your education, the fact that they can't support themselves in the style to which you accustomed them, all contributes to that reluctance to leave home. But we're being lighthearted about it, but these are very serious matters for these young people that we're dealing with. We did do a top to bottom when I first came in. And I came in from the outside, so you heard my career. I have worked for the government before, but I have mostly worked in nonprofit agencies and community agencies. And I had been a contracted provider to the Department of Children's Services for 10 years before I was appointed commissioner. And so I had been seeing the department from the outside in. And so I knew when I came into office that there was a lot that people were wanting to tell us, and they hadn't had the chance to do that. So we commissioned a series of conversations and an online survey. We heard from more than 4,000 Tennesseans. The consultant came and we were pushing out this online survey, and I said, what are you going to do with all those responses? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. We won't get that many. Most people won't take the trouble to type in a comment. I said, really? You're going to be able to sort through whatever number you get? He said, oh, yes, don't worry. We had 11,000 open-ended comments come through those surveys. No surprise to me, but it was a big shock to him. Of those 4,000, almost half of them were our own staff, who were just as frustrated as our partners were. And from that dialogue, from those, then some of them were conversations, focus groups, and interviews, but the majority of it was through these online surveys. We learned a lot about what we were doing and what we needed to do differently. So we have 4 priority areas that we are working on with our strategic plan, which is on our website if you should want to read it. The first priority area for us is customer service. Now, if you go to Department of Children's Services, and I so appreciate our staff being here today. And you go to Department of Children's Services and you ask who our customer is, guess what would you think would be the answer 90% of our staff would give you? The children. Right.
Yeah.
A logical answer. And that is a correct answer in one sense. But I would submit to you that a child who is doing well, safe, healthy, and living in a good, safe, forever family is actually our product, is actually our outcome. And our customers are all the adults. All of you who pay the taxes, all of you who live in the communities who are going to depend on those young people to grow up to be the best that they can be. All of you teachers who call in referrals, all of you doctors who see the bruises and need us to respond, those are our customers. All the families who we ask to take in these kids, all the resource parents. So we're working with our staff to think about customer service differently. So that's our first priority area. Our second priority area is, of course, the work itself, the safety, the permanency, and the well-being of our kids. And safety is a primary concern for us, and we did identify early on that our child protective services are in need of improvement, and our juvenile justice services. You've heard about our permanency work is number 1, but our foster care service, our child protective services and our juvenile justice services do need improvement, and we are working in those areas. The third area that is a priority for us is our community partnerships. And this is where all of you come in. The department is massive. $624, give or take, $1 million budget, 4,300 people, We practice law in every county in Tennessee. We are in court in every county in Tennessee because we take children into custody, and we have to go into court every time we intervene in a family's life. Every time a child moves, we have to go into court over and over again so the court can supervise those activities. It is massive. We cannot do this work alone. Clubs like this, organizations like the Partnership for Children and Families in Chattanooga, which I know well, and the other organizations that you support here, the thought that you give, the opportunities that you have to help people know that we never get enough foster homes, we never have enough resource families, the way that we need to work together with communities to fill in gaps. And we have a new initiative that's going to start in this area very soon called In Home Tennessee, where we're talking to the community about what do we have, what do we not have, how can you help in ways that we've never allowed you to talk to us about before. I know when I ran a community agency, it was very frustrating to me. I'd go out and get grants, and I'd come back and I'd say to the Department of Children's Services, I've got money for you, I've got services, and I couldn't get anybody's attention because they're so consumed with the work. So we're giving our staff new training and new tools to work with the community. So we've got customer service, our safety, permanency, and well-being, our community partnerships, and then a high-performing workforce. When I first became commissioner, somebody said to me, what's the thing that keeps you up the most at night? What's the thing you worry about the most? And I would say to them, our frontline staff. Because that's where the work really happens. And what we're doing at DCS these days is nothing less than turning the organization upside down. And so instead of thinking about how many more rules and regulations can we make, and how many more layers can we add, and how much more can we pile on, we need to get underneath all of that and think about that worker on the front line. I sometimes make the analogy to the courier services, you know, FedEx or UPS, phenomenally successful. Think about the volume that moves, and do you worry about whether your package is going to get there? Typically not. But I can tell you, if FedEx was DCS, this is how they'd be working. They'd say to their driver, well, your packages are over there in the warehouse somewhere. Figure out which ones are yours. Figure out your best route. Get back here as quick as you can. And by the way, take your own car. That is literally how we engineer our work at the Department of Children's Services. So this won't be simple. It won't be quick. It won't be easy. But we need to turn that upside down, that whole perspective upside down, and get that worker in the forefront and figure out what tools and how that work needs to be engineered so that they can be making those right decisions day in and day out. Because I work hard, I work long, I can't be in 95 counties every day. Nothing I do is more important in the life of a child than what that staff does when they go out and knock on that door. And we need to think about them too, because we were talking to a staff today who said, I'm afraid when I have to go out and knock on these doors, and I don't know what's going to be there when I'm going to look for that parent. We've got to take that into consideration because that affects how that person does their work and makes their decisions. So I'm going to stop. That's kind of the big, quick swipe. I know there's probably lots of you have connections to us one way or another, or experience with us one way or another, and we'll want to talk about some of that, so I want to leave time to answer your questions.
I've been involved with the Children's Advocacy Center here at Holston Home for Kids. Can you maybe explain your department's involvement with those types
Sure.
of entities?
But he's asking about the child advocacy centers. That there are child advocacy centers served in every judicial district in Tennessee, and the Department of Children's Services provides about $2.5 million a year to help those centers operate. They perform forensic interviews, which is a specialized interview by a specially trained person. They allow the child to come into a center where they can get a whole array of services and be videotaped in their interviews so that they don't have to tell their story over and over again, and those videos are supposed to be able to be used in court. Holston Homes is a great organization, and I've known the CEO there, Art Masker. He was one of the first people to welcome me when I came to Tennessee, so I remember him very fondly. That is one of our contracted providers. They're up in Greenville, Tennessee, and but they have foster care in different places around the state, and that great Christian organization that works with our youth to help them get ready for either going home to a permanent family or back to their biological family. Do all kinds of counseling, different things. Happy to do it. I'm glad to know that you're volunteering. You know, I'm thrilled to be commissioner. And so happy for the opportunity to do this because we really can bring DCS forward. But you can do so very, very much from where you sit. Serving with these community organizations. If somebody approaches you to serve on one of those boards, if I can just encourage you to listen to them and try to say yes if you can, because those volunteers make such a huge difference to those organizations. Knowing about that work and thinking about how the community can come together for those solutions is really how we're going to get. The government can do certain things and DCS has to do certain things, but our problems need to be solved on the community level, and we need everybody's participation and thought and contribution to that to bring those solutions together. Yeah.
Do you have any powers of your own to protect a child, or does
Any what?
Do you have any powers of your own to protect a child, or does everything have to go through the courts?
That's a really good question. There's so many levels to that question. If a child is in imminent danger, we have the authority to go in and remove that child. If it's going to be a very confrontational situation, we're going to ask the police to go with us. Our workers do not have anything more than mace to protect themselves with. So we have the authority to do that. Now, I'll appreciate it if you don't necessarily pass this around, but recently it was ruled that we can't go into a home without permission. Unless the parents agree to let us in, just like the police. So we now have to knock on that door and say, may we come in? And if they say no, we have to go get a court order. So it's not as much as if we have reason to believe that there's a child in danger, we have a right to intervene. But if we do not have that right to intervene.
With your with your talk about building partnerships and the limited resources you have for the limited number of case managers and things of that nature, and building community relationships, what do you as commissioner see as the interaction between the department and groups like CASA, the court-appointed special advocates, volunteer groups like that?
Yeah, those are all very important partners. He's asking about CASA. Those are very important partners. I have a great respect for CASA volunteers because they agree to do some of the very, very hardest work and very in-depth and time-consuming. They have to take a lot of training before they can even start that work. I mean, we need to be in conversation with those groups. We need to be talking with those groups. They need to be at the table when we're talking about our community solutions, and that's part of what we do within Home Tennessee. We bring those groups together to identify where the resources are, where there are not. What we find is that there are far more resources than anybody individually thinks. It always kind of reminds me of the fishes and the loaves. You get everybody together in the community, and all of a sudden there's a lot more services than anybody knew about. Now it's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a great place to start. Before you start looking for additional resources, you first need to know what's actually already out there. What else? Questions that you have from things you've been...
Could you expand on the youth development program just a little bit?
Sure. Our juvenile justice division runs 3 youth development centers for males across the state. One is in West Tennessee, one is in Nashville, and one is in Dandridge in East Tennessee. And then the girls are served in a contracted placement with an organization called G4S. They have to have certain charges and things like that before they can be sent to the Youth Development Center. They get a full assessment. They have a full array of medical services, and the centerpiece of the Youth Development Centers is actually the school, where the youth are required to attend or go to GED. If they have finished their GED, we have some other activities for them. There's vocational training. These centers being so far, and Nashville's the only place where there's, really a population and a center. The centers being very far from the families is really a challenge for us, and so we do try very hard to make sure that parents have the transportation that they need to come and see their youth, because that family connection is really important, and in most cases, those young people will be going home. The average length of stay is about 6 months. Does that? And then in the community, we have staff. In some communities, we provide probation. In some communities, the courts provide that service. So that varies across the state. But we're working with families in communities also across the state.
So basically, it's in lieu of incarceration?
Actually, if you went to one of these centers, you would not have any trouble. You would have trouble distinguishing it from a jail. I mean, these are lockdown facilities, with big barbed wire fences around them. We are trying to work with the Center for Juvenile Justice Reform at Georgetown University and some others on how we can serve more of these youth in their communities. Research tells us incarceration is the most expensive alternative. It does not work any better, and there are some studies that suggest it actually has a negative effect on recidivism and on the youth's future. So if we know something costs a whole lot, and at least is no more effective and maybe less effective, we would behoove ourselves as a state to be thinking about how can we do this differently. Now, what we're looking at is a balanced approach. There are 3 tenets to that balanced approach. One is offender accountability. These young people have to be held accountable for their actions. Just telling them they're there now, we'll make it all better, is not helping them develop a sense of responsibility. So the first leg of that is offender accountability. The second leg is community safety. We have to be sure that youth who really pose a danger to the community are in a secure setting, or at least supervised where they can't pose that threat. And then the third one is development for the young person. It doesn't help us to do community safety and accountability if we're not helping that young person grow into somebody who's going to be productive. So it's a balanced approach that we're looking at.
Commissioner O'Day, thank you so much.
Thank you. You've been wonderful. I want to thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Again, thank you so much, Commissioner O'Day. In the line